Okay, here we are. It's chapter 3, and last we left the animals, they had rebelled and successfully taken over the farm, and we're in the first stages of trying to figure out how to manage themselves. They've come up with the 7 commandments, so they have some kind of way to treat one another and how to avoid becoming like the ruler from before, which was humans. And they don't want to act like humans, and they don't want to treat each other badly. All animals are equal, and they're getting ready to do what they have to do to manage the farm on their own. Okay, so here we are, chapter 3. How they toiled and sweated to get the hay in, but their efforts were rewarded, for the harvest was an even bigger success than they had hoped. Sometimes the work was hard. The implements had been designed for human beings and not for animals, and it was a great drawback that no animal was able to use any tool that involved standing on his hind legs. But the pigs were so clever that they could think of a way around every difficulty. As for the horses, they knew every inch of the field and, in fact, understood the business of mowing and raking far better than Jones and his men had ever done. The pigs did not actually work, but directed and supervised the others. With their superior knowledge, it was natural that they should assume the leadership. Boxer and Clover would harness themselves to the cutter or the horse rake. No bits or reins were needed in these days, of course, and tramp steadily round and round the field with a pig walking behind and calling out, "Gee up, comrade," or "Whoa back, comrade," as the case might be. And every animal, down to the humblest, worked at turning the hay and gathering it. Even the ducks and hens toiled to and fro all day in the sun, carrying tiny wisps of hay in their beaks. In the end, they finished the harvest in 2 days less time than it had usually taken Jones and his men. Moreover, it was the biggest harvest that the farm had ever seen. There was no wastage whatever. The hens and ducks with their sharp eyes had gathered up the very last stalk, and not an animal on the farm had stolen so much as a mouthful. All through that summer, the work of the farm went like clockwork. The animals were happy as they had never conceived it possible to be. Every mouthful of food was an acute, positive pleasure, now that it was truly their own food, produced by themselves and for themselves, not doled out to them by a grudging master. With the worthless, parasitical human beings gone, there was more for everyone to eat. There was more leisure, too. Inexperienced though the animals were, they met with many difficulties. For instance, later in the year, when they harvested the corn, they had to tread it out in the ancient style and blow away the chaff with their breath, since the farm possessed no threshing machine. But the pigs, with their cleverness, and Boxer, with his tremendous muscles, always pulled them through. Boxer was the admiration of everybody. He had been a hard worker even in Jones's time, but now he seemed more like 3 horses than 1. There were days when the entire work of the farm seemed to rest on his mighty shoulders. From morning to night, he was pushing and pulling, always at the spot where the work was hardest. He had made arrangement with one of the cockerels to call him in the mornings, half an hour earlier than anyone else, and would put in some volunteer labor at whatever seemed to be most needed before the regular day's work began. His answer to every problem, every setback was, "I will work harder," which he had adopted as his personal motto. But everyone worked according to his capacity. The hens and ducks, for instance, saved 5 bushels of corn at the harvest by gathering up the stray grains. Nobody stole. Nobody grumbled over his rations. The quarreling and biting and jealousy, which had been normal features of life in the old days, had almost disappeared. Nobody shirked, or almost nobody. Molly, it was true, was not good at getting up in the mornings and had a way of leaving work early on the ground that there was a stone in her hoof. And the behavior of the cat was somewhat peculiar. It was soon noticed that when there was work to be done, the cat could never be found. She would vanish for hours on end and then reappear at meal times or in the evening after work was over, as though nothing had happened. But she always made such excellent excuses and purred so affectionately that it was impossible not to believe in her good intentions. Old Benjamin, the donkey, seemed quite unchanged since the rebellion. He did his work in the same slow, obstinate way as he had done it in Jones's time, never shirking and never volunteering for extra work either. About the rebellion and its results, he would express no opinion. When asked whether he was not happier now that Jones was gone, he would say only, "Donkeys live a long time. None of you has ever seen a dead donkey." And the others had to be content with this cryptic answer. On Sundays, there was no work. Breakfast was an hour later than usual, and after breakfast, there was a ceremony which was observed every week without fail. First came the hoisting of the flag. Snowball had found in the harness room an old green tablecloth of Mrs. Jones's and had painted on it a hoof and a horn in white. This was run up the flagstaff in the farmhouse garden every Sunday morning. The flag was green, Snowball explained, to represent the green fields of England, while the hoof and horn signified the future republic of the animals which would arise when the human race had been finally overthrown. After the hoisting of the flag, all the animals trooped into the big barn for a general assembly, which was known as the meeting. Here, the work of the coming week was planned out and resolutions were put forward and debated. It was always the pigs who put forward the resolutions. The other animals understood how to vote, but could never think of any resolutions of their own. Snowball and Napoleon were by far the most active in the debates, but it was noticed that these two were never in agreement. Whatever suggestion either of them made, the other could be counted on to oppose it. Even when it was resolved, a thing no one could object to in itself, to set aside the small paddock behind the orchard as a home of rest for animals who were past work, there was a stormy debate over the correct retiring age for each class of animal. The meeting always ended with the singing of Beasts of England, and the afternoon was given up to recreation. The pigs had set aside the harness room as a headquarters for themselves. Here in the evenings, they studied blacksmithing, carpentering, and other necessary arts from books which they had brought out of the farmhouse. Snowball also busied himself with organizing the other animals into what he called animal committees. He was indefatigable at this. He formed the egg production committee for the hens, the Clean Tails League for the cows, the Wild Comrades Re-Education Committee, the object of this was to tame the rats and the rabbits, the Wider Wool Movement for the sheep, and various others, besides instituting classes in reading and writing. On the whole, these projects were a failure. The attempt to tame the wild creatures, for instance, broke down almost immediately. They continued to behave very much as before, and when treated with generosity, simply took advantage of it. The cat joined the Re-Education Committee and was very active in it for some days. She was seen one day sitting on a roof and talking to some sparrows who were just out of her reach. She was telling them that all animals were now comrades, and that any sparrow who chose could come and perch on her paw. But the sparrows kept their distance. The reading and writing classes, however, were a great success. By the autumn, almost every animal on the farm was literate in some degree. As for the pigs, they could already read and write perfectly. The dogs learned to read fairly well, but were not interested in reading anything except the 7 Commandments. Muriel, the goat, could read somewhat better than the dogs, and sometimes used to read to the others in the evenings from scraps of newspaper which she found on the rubbish heap. Benjamin could read as well as any pig, but never exercised his faculty. So far as he knew, he said, there was nothing worth reading. Clover learnt the whole alphabet, but could not put words together. Boxer could not get beyond the letter D. He would trace out A, B, C, D in the dust with his great hoof, and then would stand staring at the letters with his ears back, sometimes shaking his forelock, trying with all his might to remember what came next, and never succeeding. On several occasions, indeed, he did learn E, F, G, H, but by the time he knew them, it was always discovered that he had forgotten A, B, C, and D. Finally, he decided to be content with the first 4 letters and used to write them out once or twice every day to refresh his memory. Molly refused to learn any but the 6 letters which spelt her own name. She would form these very neatly out of pieces of twig and would then decorate them with a flower or 2 and walk around them admiring them. None of the other animals on the farm could get further than the letter A. It was also found that the stupider animals, such as the sheep, hens, and ducks, were unable to learn the 7 Commandments by heart. After much thought, Snowball declared that the 7 Commandments could in effect be reduced to a single maxim, namely, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. This, he said, contained the essential principle of animalism. Whoever thoroughly grasped it would be safe from human influences. The birds at first objected, since it seemed to them that they also had 2 legs. But Snowball proved to them that this was not so. A bird's wing, comrades, he said, is an organ of propulsion and not of manipulation. It should therefore be regarded as a leg. The distinguishing mark of man is the hand, the instrument with which he does all his mischief. The birds did not understand Snowball's long words, but they accepted his explanation, and all the humbler animals set to work to learn the new maxim by heart. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad was inscribed on the end wall of the barn, above the 7 Commandments and in bigger letters. When they had once got it by heart, the sheep developed a great liking for this maxim, and often, as they lay in the field, they would all start bleating, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and kept it up for hours on end, never growing tired of it. Napoleon took no interest in Snowball's committees. He said that the education of the young was more important than anything that could be done for those who were already grown up. It happened that Jessie and Bluebell had both whelped soon after the hay harvest, giving birth between them to 9 sturdy puppies. As soon as they were weaned, Napoleon took them away from their mothers, saying that he would make himself responsible for their education. He took them up into a loft, which could only be reached by a ladder from the harness room, and there kept them in such seclusion that the rest of the farm soon forgot their existence. The mystery of where the milk went to was soon cleared up. It was mixed every day into the pig's mash. The early apples were now ripening, and the grass of the orchard was littered with windfalls. The animals had assumed as a matter of course that these would be shared out equally. One day, however, the order went forth that all the windfalls were to be collected and brought to the harness room for the use of the pigs. At this, some of the other animals murmured, but it was no use. All the pigs were in full agreement on this point, even Snowball and Napoleon. Squealer was sent to make the necessary explanations to the others. "Comrades," he cried, "you do not imagine, I hope, that we pigs are doing this in a spirit of selfishness and privilege. Many of us actually dislike milk and apples. I dislike them myself. Our sole object in taking these things is to preserve our health. Milk and apples, this has been proved by science, comrades, contain substances absolutely necessary to the well-being of a pig. We pigs are brain workers. The whole management and organization of this farm depends on us. Day and night, we are watching over your welfare. It is for your sake that we drink that milk and eat those apples. Do you know what would happen if we pigs failed in our duty? Jones would come back. Yes, Jones would come back. Surely, comrades," cried Squealer most pleadingly, skipping from side to side and whisking his tail. "Surely there is no one among you who wants to see Jones come back." Now, if there was one thing that the animals were completely certain of, it was they did not want Jones back. When it was put to them in this light, they had no more to say. The importance of keeping the pigs in good health was all too obvious. So it was agreed, without further argument, that the milk and the windfall apples, and also the main crop of apples when they ripened, should be reserved for the pigs alone. Let's go to our questions. All right, so we were kind of midway into how do the pigs resemble human revolutionary leaders, and how the animals feel about the revolution at first. So let's talk a little bit more about those. So the pigs, revolutionary leaders tended to also be exclusive, like these guys. So even though they talk for the common man, they kind of hold themselves as better because they have more knowledge. They are more learned. They've studied. They know what they're doing. Okay, so they don't share in the wealth either. Okay, this is kind of important. So the animals at first, their harvest is great. They're all working together. Nobody steals from the harvest. So at first the revolution is working really well. But already there is kind of a shift in what you can expect from the animals. So when you answer the question number 10, which says, of all the animals, which ones do you think are trustworthy? Use your own opinion here. So far, we have no reason to distrust many of the animals. If you answer pigs here, then I think you are missing out on something. Because initially, like when they first milk the cows and they're like, nothing to see here, go to work. And then they come back and the milk is gone. It takes a while before the pigs come forward and say, no, we're drinking it. And then they have to come out with science says we need the milk and the apples because we're doing all the brain work here and pigs need it. Okay, so the information came after the act was committed, and that's not very trustworthy. For my answer, I'm going to say like Boxer, the horses. They seem to be working extra hard, and they don't even have to have all the information, but they're super loyal, and they're always ready to do their best. Boxer seems to be the hardest worker and maybe the most trustworthy of everybody. I can't say horses in general because there's one, Molly, who all she really seems to care about is herself, and she comes and goes to, work kind of like it as she feels like it. Okay, so Molly is a different breed altogether. Okay. Next we have, why do the animals accept the pigs as leaders? I suppose there's a lot of reasons, but it seems to be that because they're smart. They read and they know a lot of things. They figure out, because they're clever, how to use tools. They figure out new skills that the other animals don't have. So they're smart. And that makes them good leaders because they have good ideas. Now, Snowball tries to form a lot of committees and they all seem to be unsuccessful. So even though they have leadership skills, they can't always get the animals to do what they say. And that's also kind of important. And then they finally, number 12, oh wait, that's not the final one for today. Number 12 says the slogan, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, is more popular than the 7 commandments. Why is that? This is pretty simple. When they're talking about who all learns to read, it's a fairly limited list. You've got the pigs, you've got the dogs who really don't care about reading, but they can. Muriel the goat, who's a pretty good reader. The horses have some limited idea of alphabet. You know, there's a little here and there, but most of the animals can't read, don't even care to try. So they make it so they can't memorize all 7 of the commandments. We're going to talk about what this means with people in just a moment. What they finally come up with is that the animals can remember 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. They can remember that and hang on to that. And they justify for the chickens and the other birds that their wings are propulsion, so they're like legs. Okay, so 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And it's just because it's something they can remember. They seem too stupid to remember anything more. What is Orwell saying about humans? Because remember, this isn't a story about animals. This is a story about humans who rebel against a bad system. Let's take ourselves to the Russian Revolution. If Jones was the Tsar and Napoleon and Snowball are the leaders of the rebellion, and by the way, Lenin dies pretty early in the Soviet Union's history after the rebellion, and his 2 main leaders below him were Stalin and Trotsky. So who do you think they're symbolized by in the story? Okay. But what are they saying about the Russian people in the Russian Revolution? If this is an allegory for the Russian Revolution, you've got the leaders who are smart, learning new skills, and taking good stuff off the top, milk and apples, right? Then you have the lower classes that are working hard, being true to the idea of animalism and following the rules. They're so dumb they can only memorize like the bare basics of it. Now, is this a matter of education? Like they aren't very educated, so this is the best they can do as far as what they can remember and do? Or is it something more than that, like kind of a disrespect for the intellect of the lower classes? It's hard to say. But no matter what, it is true. Some people think being educated is not just unimportant, but almost undesirable. And those folks just want to be told what is right and what is wrong. And so, do humans do that? Yeah. So it's not, this is still symbolizing humans. It's not just an animal thing, obviously. Pigs are smart animals. So Orwell chose a good one for that, to make the pigs in charge. They're smart, they're learners. But they signify humans who educate themselves so they can better the world around them, at least at first. Okay, so after that, we get to the next one, which is how does Squealer justify the pigs taking the milk and apples for themselves? And this is kind of important. He tells them it's science. Pigs need this stuff. And so that's why you got to give us all the windfall. Windfall apples are the ones that just, they fall out of the trees on their own. And you find them on the ground. They're not the harvested apples that are picked. They're the ones that fall down. He's like, oh yeah, we're going to take all the milk and the windfall apples. And then when the apples are harvested, they just take all of them. So already the new leaders are giving themselves privileges. And that should make everybody a little suspicious, because wasn't that the whole problem? That the leaders took things that they didn't necessarily need or deserve, but the animals are dumb enough to fall for it because the pigs are smart and they're giving them all the other things to live by. All right, and I think that puts us at the end of what we need to know for chapter 3. Next up is going to be chapter 4. And there's another battle, so that'll be kind of fun. See you then.